Hey everyone, I'm Dave Merrill and I'm the Connections Pastor here at The Gathering. I want to thank you for checking out this week's sermon video. I hope you find it meaningful and enjoyable. I also want to let you know that the sermon video is just one piece of our full online worship experience. When you attend our online worship, you can do things like watch the sermon, join us in singing, connect with others via our chat feature, practice generosity through our giving feature, and even submit your own prayer requests. So if you aren't able to join us live, be sure to connect with us weekly at gatheringnow.churchonline.org. I look forward to seeing you there, and I hope you enjoy the sermon.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome. It's good to see all of you. I want to add my welcome to Matt's. I'm the other Matt Miofsky. I'm the lead pastor here, and if we've not gotten the chance to meet, thank you so much for taking time out of your Christmas to celebrate and to worship with us. Some of you know this already, but I'm a dad. I have 3 kids. My middle kid is my daughter, Carly, and she is 12 years old. That means that she acts like she's 22 years old. She now has a phone. She spends way too much time with her friends. She is much less interested in me. She knows a lot of things she knows. And so she's all grown up, except there's moments. There's moments where I'm reminded that she's still a kid, at least a part of her is still a kid. And one of those moments came over the Thanksgiving weekend. Over Thanksgiving, I asked her to do something. This happens fairly regularly. I asked her to go get something from the basement. We have a refrigerator in our basement. And all of a sudden, as soon as I asked her to go down to the basement and get this for me, like all of her, tween confidence just like melted away because she's still scared of the basement. She's scared of going down there, in the dark. And, and what she is scared of changes all the time. It could be a burglar, a strange person, a monster, the creature from Stranger Things is the most current one. Well, whatever it is, she will not, under any circumstances, go down to the basement. No way I can get her down there. Unless her younger brother, George, is around. And if her younger brother, George, is around, then what she will do is she'll say, George, please, will you come with me? Because George is just this kind of kid. George usually says yes. And as soon as George says yes, they'll go down to the basement together. Now, this happens all the time, but for whatever reason, over Thanksgiving weekend, I started thinking about this. And I want you to think about it with me. I thought, now, wait a minute. Think about the logic of this. Now, let me, just for comparison's sake, let me show you a picture of my kids. That's Carly on the left. That's George on the right, okay? Now, George is 4 foot 10 inches tall, and he tips the scales at like 71 pounds. And I was thinking, if there really is a burglar down there, or there really is a monster, or a ghost, or a strange person, or the creature from Stranger Things, or whatever, there is no way. I love George, but there's no way George is going to do anything against any of those people. He is going to provide zero help if there's actually something there. But for Carly, the logic of it doesn't matter. It's enough to know that he's with her. And that's when it occurred to me that there is real power in knowing that you're not alone. That having someone with you changes everything. And that insight struck me as I was preparing for Christmas this year, because if you read the Christmas story in Matthew, there's 2 versions of the Christmas story. The one in Matthew, it's so simple that at first you read right by it and you think there's no miracle here. It's so simple, but it struck me as powerful this Christmas, because listen to the way that Matthew captures the miracle of Christmas. This is what he says. This is Matthew chapter 1, verse 23. He says this, he sums up the good news of Jesus' birth by saying, look, a virgin will become pregnant and give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel. And then they put it in parentheses even. It doesn't belong in parentheses. Emmanuel means God with us. That's it. The significance of Jesus for Matthew lies in those 3 words, God with us. Jesus is important because Jesus is a visible, tangible sign of something that always has been true and always will be true. And the sign is this, that we are not alone, but that God is present, dwelling with us. And what didn't stick to me until I thought about it that day with Carly is this, that the promise, just that promise, no other miracle at all, the promise of having someone with you, the promise of not being alone, that can absolutely change the way that you live your life. It can change what we're capable of facing. Having someone with us matters. And I should have known this because I'm a pastor. And so all of a sudden I started going back in the Bible and just looking at instances of this in the Old Testament. And if you go to the Old Testament, by the way, it's just a lot of stories about people facing like near impossible odds, all sorts of different things. So like, for example, if you go back and read the story of Isaac, this is way back in the Old Testament, Isaac had to go on this journey. He didn't know where the journey would go. He didn't know how long it would last. A lot of us can sympathize with that. And there was a point at which Isaac was about to give up on this. He wanted out. And do you know what changed his mind? The story says that God came to him in the middle of the night, and this is what God said to him. God said, I am with you. That's it. Or consider Moses. You know, Moses, God told Moses to go face Pharaoh. And Moses felt totally inadequate. He said, God, there is no way that I can do something like that. Do you know what changed Moses' mind? It's when God said, you don't have to worry about it because I am with you. One of my favorites, Jeremiah. I love Jeremiah because he was young, he was inexperienced. God said, I'm going to use you for a mighty purpose. And Jeremiah said, no one is going to believe me, God. And do you know what changed Jeremiah's mind? When God said, don't worry about that. I am with you. And then Joshua. Man, I memorized this verse as a kid. Joshua had to lead the people across the river to the promised land. And the scouts literally came back and said, there are giants over there. There is no way we can accomplish this. And do you know what God said to Joshua? God said this to Joshua. He said, you don't have to be frightened or scared because I am with you wherever you go. Those 4 words, I am with you. And so it shouldn't be a surprise that when the angel shows up to Mary, to ask her to do something that seems absolutely crazy by anyone's standards, do you know what the angel says to Mary? First words. Let me read it to you. She says this. The angel looks at Mary and says, rejoice, favored one. Why? Because the Lord is with you. And do you know what? In every single one of those cases, just knowing that God was with them, it gave people the capacity to overcome loneliness, to resist isolation, to take on challenges, to make changes, to risk things that they never would have risked. They lived differently and more fully just because they knew that they weren't alone. Having someone with you changes everything. And here's the thing I started to think about. And kids, you want to pay attention to this, that you might be scared of the basement, just like my daughter is, but here's a little secret. Like, you grow up, and your parents and us adults, like, we're still scared of things as well. All of us walk in facing something, right? Like, we all have a dark basement of sorts in our lives, things that we're facing. And things that we look at and we say, God, I don't know that I can do this. I don't know if I can make it through this. I don't know if I can do this another day. I mean, for some of us, these are concrete challenges. Some of you come in here tonight and you've got concrete challenges in your life. You've got things that you're wrestling with. Maybe it's addiction. Maybe it's depression. Maybe you have a huge decision that you have to make. Maybe it's a strained relationship that you don't think is ever going to get better. Some of us walk in here with particular challenges. Other of us, we walk in and maybe there's nothing specific, but we're just struggling in our lives. Some of us struggle with a sense of emptiness. Some of us just feel alone, even though that we're in the midst of a crowd. Some of us are wondering where our life is going to go and how we're going to make it matter. Some of us are stuck in jobs we don't love. Some of us are just parents who are trying to make it another day. Whatever it is, we all come in here facing something. For some of you, it's grief on a night which is supposed to be so full of joy, and yet it's hard because there's something in your life that you miss that's holding you back from experiencing the full joy of Christmas. Whatever it is that we're facing, and it's different for all of us, the good news is this. The good news is that you are not alone. That God is with you, and that truth and nothing else can help you to face things that you couldn't otherwise face, to do things that you couldn't otherwise do, to overcome challenges you couldn't otherwise overcome. It gives us a reason to hope, even when life sometimes feels like it's hard to find hope in. This one truth matters. There's a woman at the gathering, her name's Maggie, and she told me this story like 6 years ago, but I was reminded of it when I was preparing tonight. Maggie, 6 years ago, she was 27 years old, and she had the roughest year of her 27 years that year, and she tells me the story that it was like 10:30 at night, and she decided, maybe I ought to go to church. You see, she had just recently gotten a divorce, and she had to share that news with her parents on Christmas Eve of all nights, and she was feeling all sorts of things. Some of you know what the feeling's like. She felt ashamed, she felt embarrassed, she felt like a failure, but most of all, on Christmas Eve, she felt alone, and was. And so it was 10:30 at night, and she got in a car all by herself to drive right here to the McCausland site to come to church. But as she was driving, something just overcame her, and she pulled a U-turn. It's funny, when we feel all alone, sometimes the very thing that we do is pull away. And so she did, and she pulled a U-turn, and she said, I decided instead to go to downtown Clayton to a bar and just get a scotch. So she pulled a U-turn and she headed to Clayton, but God had something different planned for her that night, because when she got to the bar was closed. It had just closed. And she said that when she rounded the corner in downtown Clayton, all of a sudden, there on the corner was a glowing orange gathering sign. You see, she didn't know this, but just that year we had started a Clayton site. And we decided to have our very first Christmas Eve service over at Clayton. She didn't know that. To her, it was like magic. Like God had just placed the church right in front of her and said, you thought you were alone, but you're not. And she said that she pulled over that night and she Googled it on her phone and found out that a worship service was getting ready to start at 11 p.m. She walked into that service and she said that she was all alone when she walked in. But you know what? She heard a story, a really simple story of a baby that was born, that was good news of great joy for all people. And that baby's name was Emmanuel, which means God with us. And I just reached out to her as I was preparing for the sermon, and I said, what was the turning point for you? What was it? And without knowing what I was going to talk about, this is what she told me. She said, the turning point for me that night was simply this. I walked out knowing that I wasn't alone because God was with me. And that night I chose to turn towards him. And she went on to say that it wasn't all miracles from there. I mean, life was hard, but today, 6 years later, she's got a great husband, she's got a child. But that night, that one truth gave her the hope to keep taking a next step. Just knowing she wasn't alone, that God was with her. Friends, as we close tonight, I was thinking about the last word she said, that she heard that simple truth, which I've heard, 100 times. And yet for her that night, it struck her, and she made the decision to turn towards the God who was present in your life. And I don't, again, pretend like I know everything that you're wrestling with. Tonight, I don't know everything you're feeling. I don't know what you face in your family, in your life, in your work, in your journey. But I know this, that you don't have to do it alone. That as lonely as the journey feels sometimes, the good news of Christmas is this, that you're not alone, that God is with you. And the invitation of Christmas is to turn towards God. As I was preparing to close this, I just started thinking that somewhere in the room tonight is another story that we're going to get to tell in a year or 2 years or 3 years. A story that's going to look different simply because you took to heart the fact that tonight there's a God who is present and working in your life. And even if you can't see it or feel it, there's a reason to hope, there's a reason to try, there's a reason to risk. There's a reason to change. There's a reason to do it. There's a reason that you can overcome it. I told my daughter that basements are not going to be the last thing that she faces in her life, she's scared of. And yet my prayer for her, it's my prayer for all of you, in fact, is that she might remember that she's not alone, that there's always someone with her, and that because of that, there's a reason to hope. I invite you to bow your heads and pray with me. Gracious and holy God, some of us tonight just need the simplicity of that promise, and we need it to be real, and we want and need to feel it. And so, God, tonight I pray that in the quiet of this night, in the flicker of a candlelight, in the moment of a song, that we might know that you are present with us, that you're walking with us, that you're working in our life, and that because of that, tonight we can face any darkness we might face. God, remind us tonight that we are not alone. We pray this in the name of Emmanuel, God with us. Amen.